Hi, welcome everybody to the inaugural Seattle Building Tenant Power Workshop of the year on the subject of affordable housing. We ask that you introduce yourself in the chat, throw your name, your pronouns, your neighborhood, any other information you'd like to share into the chat so we know who's joining us tonight. And forgive us for not having intro music this month. You get to listen to me instead. My name is Dee. My pronouns are they, them, and I live in Capitol Hill. And I am one of the program coordinators here at Seattle. So thanks so much for being here. We're going to give just a couple more minutes for folks who are running late to show up, and then we will jump right into it. We hope this workshop is as interesting for you as it was for me to put together. We've got a great lineup of guest speakers for you today.
I think we can get started.
All right, Kate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kate Rubin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the organizing director at Seattle. Tonight's Building Tenant Power Workshop, Affordable Housing 101. I'm joined by our pledge coordinator, Dee Powers, and our guest speakers. Let's see, Don Daly, events chair of the 43rd Legislative District Democrats. Sanatina Sanchez, resident board member of Community Roots Housing. John Grant, Chief Strategy Officer of the Low Income Housing Institute, and Ty Reed, co-chair of the House Our Neighbors Steering Committee. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. Next slide, please. We are on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to recognize that we are occupying the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. As we do this important work on these lands, we understand that our collective liberation cannot happen without Indigenous sovereignty. We encourage each of you to sign the petition for federal recognition of the Duwamish tribe. And if you're able, visit the Longhouse and pay rent to the Duwamish. You can learn more from Real Rent Duwamish. We'll include a link for them in the resource guide that we'll send after the presentation. And we'll also drop a copy of that in the chat. Our resource guide also contains contact information for the Renting in Seattle helpline, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, also known as SDCI. They're responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws, the Seattle Office for Civil Rights, as well as a bunch of other organizations that provide services to renters. Please note that we are recording this workshop, and we will be posting it on YouTube later. So just be cognizant of that. If you unmute and decide to speak, please don't interrupt our guest speakers while they're talking. There will be time for questions after, and you can use the chat throughout. Next slide. We encourage you to get more involved with Seattle. We're seeking table volunteers, flyer friends, people interested in developing their skills as part of a tenant leadership team, volunteers for the pledge, and folks who are willing to share their lived experience. Now is a great time, especially if you have lived experience with rent increases that were impactful, or late fees or any other fees that harmed you. We're kind of doing some organizing around that, both city and statewide. And so we need tenant stories to push help forward. Sorry, that was kind of an awkward sentence. So send me an email directly. It's kate@bseattle.org. If you have a story to share, and I will connect you where it's time. And then we also have our Elder Renter Council and the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. Dee will drop the links to those in the chat. And that's another way to work with your fellow renters and build renter power. So we'll go to the next slide and hop into some upcoming events. Sunday, January 29th, 8 p.m. at Numos. Join the House Our Neighbors Coalition, the 43rd Legislative District Democrats, and Tech for Housing, Numos and Capitol Hill for a first of its kind event, Social Housing Saves Our Stages, a music benefit for I-135 social housing. You can vote and dance the night away at the same time. Come enjoy live performances by Grammy-nominated artists who are part of the KEXP music family, featuring performances by Hollis, Tomo Nakayama, the Black Stacks, and many more. This event is ages 21 plus and is $15 in advance or $20 at the door. Make a real difference while learning about how social housing will benefit Seattle. Monday, January 30th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. At United Churches. It's the Resident Action Project, also known as RAP, teach-in and action on rent stabilization. Join RAP in Olympia and let lawmakers know that we need rent stabilization now. We'll convene at 10 a.m. at United Churches to learn about proposed bills. After lunch, provided, we'll head to the Capitol campus to make our voices heard. Technically, registration closed yesterday, but I got special permission from Do-Over Hemo Williams of RAP to invite attendees of this workshop. So just make sure that you register tonight if you want to go. It will be a great opportunity to hang out with a few of BSeattle's board members, Cecilia and Dolores, and me. And so don't feel shy about going alone because you can sit with us. And then let's see, Monday, February 6th through Wednesday, February 8th. It's Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Days 2023. You can register today for the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance's Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Days. You'll have the opportunity to participate in advocacy skill building workshops, connect with hundreds of fellow advocates, and virtually meet with your local lawmakers about key housing and homelessness policies. Your voice and your story will be a powerful contribution to these meetings. So we'll drop the link to register in the chat. Wednesday, February 8th, 3 to 4:45 p.m. It's Solid Grounds Rent Smart webinar, Domestic Violence, Know Your Rights in 2023. So you'll discuss tenants' rights and procedures under the Residential Landlord Tenant Act of Washington State. You'll learn how you can break a lease without liability after an incident of abuse, how to make a report of an incident to a qualified third party, how to try getting an eviction off of your tenant screening report and get a security deposit back. Thursday, February 9th, I've got a cat exploring over here. Thursday, February 9th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at El Centro de la Raza in room 311, which is the Roberto Maestras Digital Literacy Lab, or online via Zoom, is the next meeting of the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. BSeattle and the Tenants Union host grassroots renter organizing council for Seattle renters to work together to strategize and fight for the renter protections that they feel are important, give and receive peer-to-peer building organizing support, and cultivate community. Dinner will be provided for in-person attendees. Let's see, next slide, please. Saturday, February 11th at 11 a.m. There's a Renting in Seattle virtual presentation by SDCI. SDCI invites you to their popular annual home fair events. This virtual presentation will be held on February 11th at 11 a.m., completely free of charge. Tuesday, February 14th, 8 p.m., Seattle special election ballots are due. Get the vote out. The special election ballots should be arriving in your mailbox either today or tomorrow. Make sure to vote on Initiative 135 for the creation of social housing in Seattle. Ballots are due. It's Valentine's Day, so vote for the love of our city and vote for social housing. And And then the day after, Wednesday, February 15th, 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. at the Capitol Hill Library or online via Zoom is the Elder Renter Council meeting. The Elder Renter Council is similar to the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. However, it centers renters ages 55 plus, but renters of all ages are welcome to join us. The library is fully accessible and snacks and beverages will be provided for in-person attendees. Wednesday, February 22nd, 6 p.m. It's our next Building Tenant Power Workshop, Intro to Building Organizing. We'll be joined by organizers from the Puget Sound Tenants Union for an introductory course on how to organize your building. When we organize, we can use our collective power to make changes where it matters most, at home. And then finally, Saturday, February 25th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Filipino Community Center. It's the Seattle Home Fair hosted by SDCI. So they'll wrap up their annual home fair with an in-person event at the Filipino Community Center. RSVPs are appreciated if you are planning to attend. This is a great way to talk to the folks at SDCI and learn about all of the programs that they run. Next slide, please. Okay. Before we jump into the meat of the workshop, I just want to remind everyone that Economic Displacement Rental Assistance, also known as EDRA, went into effect on July 1st of last year. With many of us experiencing sharp rent increases throughout the city over the last year, we just wanted to mention how EDRA provides relocation assistance to tenants who receive a housing cost increase of 10% or more by itself or combined with increases that occurred within a 12 months of the new notice taking effect, and earn 80% of the area median income or below, and they've notified their landlord of their intent to move. When tenants qualify for EDRA, landlords must pay up to 3 times the monthly housing cost. SDCI has created a slideshow that goes into the details a little bit more. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. There's also an application portal for EDRA with forms and more information. We'll drop a link in the chat as well. And now, Tanya, please pause the screen sharing for a moment, and I'm gonna pass the virtual mic over to Dee to say more.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Dee Powers. And tonight's workshop is on the subject of affordable housing here in Seattle. We will go over some of the programs we have already in this city and lay out who can benefit from each type of housing. We will also touch on how these programs fall short of helping everyone who needs them, plus discuss an exciting new option coming soon to a ballot box near you. We'll gloss over the in-depth history of how each program came to be and instead give you the rundown on how best to find a place that suits your individual circumstance. If you're currently somewhere where the rent is quickly climbing out of reach, or you're without a home at all, one of these programs may give you exactly what you need most, a less burdensome rental cost without having to leave our beautiful city altogether. I know you've come in with questions both big and small. We will give opportunities for discussion and questions later in the program, so you can leave feeling like you're ready to tackle something new. Seattle may be a city with a wide range of affordable housing options available to its residents, but what is affordable housing anyway? Who even qualifies for a unit that's listed for below market rate? Aren't there years-long wait lists for all this sort of stuff? We will untangle some of these frequently asked questions now before we get into the nitty-gritty. So, what is affordable housing? It's property purposely rented at a price below market value or is subsidized by the government, usually by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, through our local administrative body, the Seattle Housing Authority. SHA is in fact Seattle's largest landlord with over 8,000 units across the city. We will get more into the SHA programs in just a bit. Many of the other programs are intended as workforce housing. allowing working class families to live closer to their jobs in the city, which may pay better than similar roles in the suburbs, but still rarely approach the median income line. People such as baristas, daycare workers, and healthcare aides deserve an affordable place to live too, after all. Finally, there are also special subsidized supportive housing projects for our unhoused neighbors when they transition back to life indoors after the trauma of living outside. These placements are done by referral only and are triaged based on need, but can only house a tiny percentage of our neighbors who camp in parks and on sidewalks throughout the city. Go ahead and resume sharing for me. And now let's talk about who can qualify for an affordable housing unit in Seattle. All of the programs we will talk about tonight will require your income to be under a specific line based on your household size. This is shown in the chart on your screen, which is updated and adjusted annually. This is called the percentage of AMI, or area median income. Area median income is the midpoint of a region's income distribution. Half of the families in a region earn more than the median, and half earn less. The Seattle Times stated in an article dated September of just last year that the area median income for a household of 4 people had soared to $110,000. So let's go over this AMI chart before we move on. On the chart, AMI is the limit that determines the maximum allowable income for any certain apartment. You can calculate your household income and your likely AMI category per the King County median income with these 3 steps. Step 1, calculate your total annual income. You need to add the gross yearly income for each person in your household to determine your household's total annual income. This number should combine wages, salaries, assets, and other sources of income such as child support, alimony, or Social Security benefits. Step 2, determine the number of people in your household. Using the chart on your screen, move your finger vertically along the leftmost column and find the number of people living in your home. And step 3, find your AMI percent. Move your finger horizontally in the row for your household size and find the first income value that is greater than your household's total annual income. You may qualify for programs serving the AMI percent at that level and greater. We will mention these percentages throughout the rest of the workshop, and each program serves a different range of incomes. Please keep your estimated percentage in mind so you know which of these programs might work best for you. Does anyone have any questions about the AMI chart before I continue? Seems like a lot of quiet. All right. Well, in that case, I'll keep moving. Let's talk wait lists. The programs with the long wait lists are the subsidized ones, where part of your rent is paid by someone else and your portion of the rent scales up and down based on your income. There are many apartments out there without any wait list at all, and they are not subsidized. Instead, they are listed at a below market rate price to qualify the landlord for special tax credits, and these apartments have both lower and upper income qualifications. These multifamily tax exemption apartments are either set aside in what are otherwise market rate buildings or are run as entire affordable apartment buildings. The set aside units usually require an individual to be somewhere close to the 80% of AMI line. but the full property versions, especially those run by nonprofit affordable housing providers like Community Roots Housing, will serve people at levels from 30 to 60% on the chart that we've discussed just now. All landlords are required to abide by Seattle's first-in-time ordinance as they process applications to rent the unit, even for these lower-priced places. If you are the first applicant to apply and qualify for that place, it's yours. We will drop a link to the first-in-time ordinance in the chat. Next slide, please. This seems like a good time to transition into talking about the Seattle Housing Authority, which I'll try to keep brief because these are the places with the wait lists. They're great for long-term planning, less great if you need affordable housing right now. The Seattle Housing Authority has been supplying housing to the public since 1939. It was then and remains today a separate public corporation that has ties to, but is not under the jurisdiction of the city, state, or federal government. Starting with a development in the area known as Yesler Terrace near downtown, they created the state's first publicly subsidized housing, a site that would also become the nation's first racially integrated public housing. Next slide, please. Since those early days, Seattle Housing Authority has seen highs and lows and withstood the pressures of an increasingly capitalist world. But it has all culminated in our housing authority being the largest landlord in the city. Today, SHA provides long-term, low-income rental housing and rental assistance to at least 37,000 people, representing over 18,000 households in the city of Seattle. SHA owns and operates 8,390 apartments, as well as some single-family homes at almost 400 sites throughout the city. Additionally, SHA administers over 11,000 housing choice vouchers. If you would like to learn more about the evolution of the Housing Authority, you can find a more detailed timeline by following the link in chat. Public housing is available to applicants earning 80% or less of the median income, though households that are below the 30% line or are experiencing homelessness receive priority on the wait list. These properties have what is called a project-based subsidy. The subsidy is assigned to the apartment itself, not to the person occupying it, and therefore stays behind when you move out so the next occupant can benefit. Public housing only charges you approximately 1/3 of your income for rent, which is the current HUD standard for housing affordability in the United States. The downside, these public units are set up with a public but need triaged wait list, and a household has to choose which properties they want to wait on, and it can't be all of them. Wait lists can vary from as short as 3 years to as long as a decade. It requires patience and stability to hold out for one of these homes. If you want to look at various SHA public housing properties and get your household's name on the wait list, we will drop that link into the chat now so you can browse and apply. Next slide, please. Seattle Housing Authority also administers and manages the Housing Choice Voucher Program, colloquially known as Section 8. Seattle did a workshop on the voucher system in July of 2022, where we went into great detail, but we will give you the basics of the program here. Once every handful of years or so, the Seattle Housing Authority will announce well in advance of the dates that they intend to hold a lottery for waitlist positions to receive a Housing Choice voucher. These announcements will make it to social media as well as to the local news. When the lottery opens, households are usually given 1 week to put in their initial applications. This is free of charge, of course, but also the hardest part. The general rate of selection for a wait list spot is about 1 in 10, and it's prioritized to people with extremely low incomes, below the 30% line even, or people with housing instability. That means 9 out of 10 households will walk away from this lottery without a place in line at all and told they should try again next time. Sometimes next time is only 2 to 5 years. Sometimes next time could be as much as 12 years, like in Philadelphia. Their waitlist lottery application period is open right now, but it's the first time it's happened in over a decade because it took them that long to work their way through the previous lottery's waitlist. There are only so many vouchers, and to be chosen for one has been likened to finding Willy Wonka's golden ticket. Next slide. If you get picked and you get to the top of that wait list, you can use that housing choice voucher to rent a market rate apartment in the city of Seattle at a subsidized rate. Your rent will not go above a third of your income. And after the first year, you can take that voucher and move anywhere in the USA you choose. If you would like to know more about housing choice vouchers in particular, our July 2022 Demystifying Section 8 workshop was recorded and is available on YouTube. I believe Kate has already dropped the link in chat. Unless anyone has any general questions about public housing or the voucher system, I'm going to continue right along. Does anyone have questions? Well, awesome. I guess I'm informative tonight. Next slide, please. The city of Seattle requires developers to either set aside affordable units in their new buildings or pay into a city fund that is used for affordable housing projects. This is called the Mandatory Housing Affordability Plan and has opened up apartments to working class households in buildings primarily catering to market rate luxury seeking tenants. The guide we are linking in chat covers all 3 major programs, MFTE, IZ, and MHA. Most of these set-aside units are intended for renters with an income hovering just below the 80% of AMI mark, and they allow more equitable access to newly redeveloped parts of our city to those of us who have always lived here and don't want to be priced out. The reason they're all a narrow sliver hovering close to that top bracket is because for-profit developers don't like losing money. They're generally abiding by the barest minimum that will allow them to slide by. I am dropping more details about the mandatory housing affordability requirement in chat now. Next slide, please. The Seattle Office of Housing's multifamily tax exemption and incentive zoning programs incentivize developers to provide affordable housing opportunities to low-income renters. In return for leasing at least 20 to 25% of their units at restricted rents, property owners receive either a residential property tax exemption in the case of MFTE housing, or the ability to build extra residential floor area in the case of incentive zoning, otherwise known as IZ. Details about both types of properties can be found in the chat. While the IZ permissions kind of, the permission is permanent. It's not like we can remove all that extra floor area later. MFTE is a temporary program. Participating for-profit buildings receive special tax credits for providing this affordable housing, but only for, at most, 12 years. I lived in a building that was entirely for people around the 60% marker for a while in Pioneer Square. And I recently have heard from an old neighbor that the corporation that owns my old place is preparing to move everyone out, gut the inside of the building, and convert it to luxury market rate rentals. But whether you choose an MFTE, an IZ, or an MHA unit, the application process is basically the same. You will still need to verify your annual income is in the correct income bracket and provide proof of your exact expected gross income to the rental office at the time of application. We will drop a link in of a list from the Seattle Office of Housing of mixed income privately owned rental properties currently participating in these 3 programs. You will want to contact the property directly for more information on current vacancies and rental policies. Next slide, please. Here to talk about her experiences moving into one of the units set aside in market rate property, I'd like to introduce Dawn Daly, who is here to talk about her experience applying for and moving into an affordable set aside apartment. Dawn is one of my favorite people, and I'm very glad she's here. She is a Korean American single working mother of 3 and a young hip grandma of 2. She works at the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture, where she creates cultural educational content, invites artist residencies, and creates public programming. She recently curated an art exhibit at the Bellevue Arts Museum that highlighted all the struggles we all went through during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dawn is currently trying her best, in her own words, with the 43rd Legislative District Democrats as their events chair to help get out the vote for important bills, and political leaders also doing their best to make the changes that they embody. Thanks for being here, Dawn. I will cede the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Dee, who is also one of my favorite people in the whole world and has really been a lifeline and supportive person for me in my struggles, securing housing and with tenants' rights. So I'm very honored to be here today or this evening to talk to you about my experiences with an MFTE apartment. My apartment in Portage Bay, the rent increase was up to $1,000, and I simply could not afford it. And I'm not sure many people are aware, but we are very much underpaid educators, many of us that work within the University of Washington, and we compete with many, I dare say, overpaid tech workers, but young employees that are making 6 figures a year, whereas we're making not even 60 to 70, and many of us barely make many of those qualifications in those graphs that Dee has shown in those qualifications. I myself would put myself in the number 3 because I have 2 minors still on hand that I co-parent with their father in Olympia. When I was told ahead of time that I was going to need to look for another apartment or come up with $1,000 extra a month from Stone and squeeze blood from Stone for that rental, I looked at many MFTE apartments, and I also applied for community roots housing, and I was overqualified for community roots housing because of my employment at the University of Washington. And I was overqualified because of my income for HUD and Section 8 housing. So I did not qualify for many of these publicly owned homes. The only shot I had to continue to live in the city that I work in was MFTE apartments. And I looked at many in Capitol Hill, and I looked at one in Eastlake and South Lake Union, which was closest to where I work, and I thought would give me the greatest quality of life for my children and myself in a personal note. when I was applying for multiple MFTE apartments, there was a certain point in time where you have to give a deposit for your apartment. And I was given some pointers and advice by some folks when I was applying for and looking for MFTEs in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood I used to love and live in. It was suggested that I include my alimony and my half of my ex-husband's military retirement to boost my income to qualify for multifamily tax exempt housing, because really what they're really looking for is somebody that's earning around $75,000 to qualify for the MFTE apartments. When I applied for the one in Equinox, I boosted the income, as I would have had to have reported anyway, that I received alimony and half of my ex-husband's military retirement pay for the housing that would help me actually pay my rent, to be quite honest and explicit. I had to be explicit that that income was what would push me to be able to qualify for the apartment, because for the one that I'm living in Equinox, was oftentimes not receiving any feedback from them. I would call them relentlessly. I would contact them relentlessly. I would come to the office. And when I was given that advice from those in Capitol Hill, and I said, look, I have this extra income. It does qualify. I'm just barely qualified, but I do qualify for this MFTE within this certain ratio bracket. Please let me look at this apartment and let me apply for this apartment that you have. You have 3 apartments on hand left over MFTEs. Let me at least try. And so they looked, and I did apply. I was explicit. I gave my deposit. This is the one I wanted because it felt secure and safe and quiet, and I really needed some peace with these children of mine. And I thought everything was great, and I was going to get this apartment, so I for sure secured and gave them a notice that I was going to move within a month from my old apartment. I was not aware that they had just submitted the apartment MFTE application, the initial application, which looks like a traditional, but although extensive and lengthy MFT application of about 20 pages, pages on Equinox at least, which is part of Greystar and the Vulcan Corporation, online, that I would have to fill out an additional MFTE application, and that they would actually subsidize, or they would actually submit my initial application and my formal MFTE application to a third-party MFTE screener, and that they submitted it to this third-party screener 2 weeks before I was expected to move into my apartment. And I had already gotten movers and storage already in place so that I could move into this apartment. And I was dumbfounded, and I contacted the director of MFTE, and I said, this is my situation. I actually work for the government. I work for the University of Washington, and any extra income I have is from military retirement pay and alimony, so it's trackable. And I am a responsible single working parent with a 9-to-5 job, and I need to move into my apartment within a week and a half, or I'm going to be displaced. And he said that he discovered when he contacted them that they did submit it to a third party, and that many of these multifamily tax exempt complexes like Vulcan and Greystar, these really wonderful apartments that many of us vie to get into, do the third party extraction force for MFTE. And I asked for them to copy and print my MFTE application for the official MFTE application. And this is all on, actually, I want to be explicit with you, this is on 8 font, which is quite a small font. So if this were on the traditional, more accessible, at least 12 to 14 font page, this would be at least 100 pages long. As it is, it's about 70 pages of my official MFTE application. There were hangups I didn't even realize in the process of submitting my official MFTE, not the initial MFTE apartment application that I thought I had filled out online. That included any types of cat sitting or babysitting income that I had on my Venmos and my PayPals, because you have to submit your PayPal and your Venmo, as well as any sort of other supplementary documents. I had to provide my divorce, official divorce proceedings, and many other interpersonal documents that I felt uncomfortable sharing with them, private documents. I had to fill out an additional form, make tax forms for cat sitting. I cat sat for 3 times in 2022, and I maybe got $400 total, but I had to go through IRS and fill out a personal contract form for cat sitting for all of $400 3 times for a cat. And even the IRS, when I called them, I said, I need your help. And they were like incredulous, but they also understood the process, that for 3 cat sitting trips and $400, I had to submit this to the contractor for the MFTE apartment. Needless to say, I couldn't get my apartment on time. I was displaced. And it's a bad look, I feel like, to have a single working parent that looks good on paper, that has a job at the University of Washington, and I am homeless for a month. 2 months, actually. I was homeless for 2 months. I was couch surfing on friends' apartments within the vicinity so I could continue to work. And I had to give up my own children. And they had this wonderful public art internship, paid internship to create art in the city. And they had to give that up. And they lost a lot of their childhood. They lost their childhood this summer when their mother was homeless, and they had to go away from, whatever trauma they go through in life with the separation of us, me and their father, and our challenges, and all of the challenges that they have gone through from 2020 to 2023 on, as well as coming of age challenges in general, which are traumatizing. I was displaced, and technically they were too for this summer, and I don't think people realize until you are actually in that position how traumatic that is, and the loss of innocence that you experience. I understand Dee understands this experience very well. It's demoralizing and dehumanizing. And I have been a little private about it, but I have been more outspoken the more angry I've gotten, and the more apathetic I've seen folks get about voting in 2022, in November of 2022, when we had the lowest voter turnout. And despite all of these things, I have been heavily hoping and helping whenever I can with canvassing, because things like social housing is something that we definitely need, because MFTE housing is inaccessible. It's discriminatory. It is, I don't know if I could say it's racialized. I don't feel comfortable saying that, but I will say it is discriminatory. It is inaccessible. And I will also be honest with you, when I was speaking to many of the folks in real estate and in the rentals that we live in, that many of the folks in real estate and in the rentals are also, ironically, in MFT apartments and have gone through the same damn thing that I have gone through. And maybe secretly down low, which I am sharing for you all and making it more open, really desperately want more housing solutions, which are available now for us to vote for. I don't know if there's anything else that I can compare or share with you, except for maybe within the questions. But thank you for hearing my truth. And thank you for understanding how exhausting and extensive the situation is.
Dawn, that was so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, Congratulations on your new apartment, by the way. I'm going to have to come visit soon. Does anyone have a couple of questions for Dawn before we scoot along?
I just wanted to
I
say
have, oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay, Ruby. You go first.
I just want to say, Don, thank you, thank you, thank you. I so appreciate you sharing your story. um, I'm not a renter, and I, excuse me, lived in Atlanta for 30 years. So I came back in 2015 to find out I was at risk of displacement because of MHA, and upzoning. So I've been fighting it and speaking out about it. But I've also recently, since Kate started, these programs, I started going just to hear the plight of renters because I do work with some Black homeowners, seniors, and a lot of them are at the point where they're thinking about selling their homes, downsizing, and I'm letting everybody know, hey, it's hard out there for renters. It's hard out there for homeowners. Everybody, it seems, is just housing insecure because of situations, the government trying to force everybody in the urban villages out of their homes now. So that's another story. But I just am gathering stories so that I could call them out on it because it's really ridiculous. The city is still trying to, City Hall is still trying to turn Seattle into a rich playground for the wealthy. And it hasn't worked so far. They've been doing it for a long time. It hasn't worked. It's made more hardship on everybody than it should. And it's just really ridiculous. So I'm just glad to hear your story and any other stories that I hear. I'm just going to be calling them out on it. It may not help, but somebody has to do it.
And I
So
see.
true.
All right. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank
And
you, Ruby.
I look forward to seeing you at the next Elder Renter Council meeting.
I'll be there.
And I see Elaine has a hand raised.
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so it's really awkward. First of all, thank you, Dawn. And also, Dia, it's great to see you. It's like I've been following both of your trajectory, and it's really exciting to see you out there doing the work you're doing. And so I first want to say that. I do live outside of Seattle, so a lot of these programs are not appropriate for what I'm envisioning doing. However, I've been meeting with the King County housing folks, and I have a freestanding garage, and they are going to come out and check the zoning. And they have a program because we have less restrictions about doing, like we used to call mother-in-laws. And so they're going to take a look at it and see what it takes to be able to get it to be a livable place. But like mentioned, it has to be rented out to somebody within those AP. What do they call APIs? D?
AMI, area median income.
Okay, acronym. So I'm kind of excited. I mean, it's something definitely I'm going to look into because it's something I've always wanted to do. And I've watched the Block Project. I've watched a lot of these amazing programs that are happening. And Ruby hit it right on the mark. I'm an empty nester. So, my children are not living here no more. I don't want roommates. So I was trying to think how else can I help somebody out? And that's where that freestanding garage may become that. So I just want to let you know that I'm just excited about what you guys are doing. It's just been empowering to watch and learn with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine.
Thank-
Does anybody else have anything Kate, of course.
So I just want to touch a little bit on something that Dawn pointed out, which is like a major gap and keeps people in poverty. So you have to earn below whatever the area median income is for the building, as Dawn's living in 80%. But they still have their income qualifications that you have to earn X amount over the amount of rent. So when you think about the HUD definition of like cost burdened, where you're spending 30% or less, or sorry, 30% or more on your income, on your housing, a lot of these allegedly affordable housing keep you cost burdened. And especially if you are at the lower of the income range that's acceptable. So, 80% is the max. And if you're somebody who's in like 50 to 60 trying to qualify to get into that building, you might not earn enough. So that's just another barrier that I think we really need to overcome. So thank you for your time, Dee. I will hand it back.
Thank you. As the most recent number I could find, unfortunately, was May of 2018. But as of May of 2018, approximately 4,000 units in over 190 different apartment buildings in Seattle were rent restricted through the multifamily tax exemption program and/or incentive zoning. I know there's more now. We have seen a lot of construction over the last few years, that those rapid changes and all that redevelopment has definitely increased some of those mandatory units and created more affordable housing stock. An important point to make: each building's property management team handles the income verification and leasing process. Inquiries about current vacancies and the application process should be directed to the property you're interested in. You don't make your application for housing through the Seattle Office of Housing. They do maintain an up-to-date list of every property with affordable units available in it on their website, but not an up-to-date list of vacancies. So you'll need to reach out to the properties of your choice for that info. The Office of Housing Find Affordable Housing page is going to be dropped into the chat now.
May I add one more barrier that I think is intimidating in the MFTE application process?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you, Kate. I also want to point out that a lot of the MFTE affordable rental prices that they project are almost always within the $1,600 to $1,900 range, which also seems like an extremely expensive barrier, especially if you're an educator like me. That is definitely also outside of, and maybe up to 75 to 80% of many of Seattle residents' annual salaries. So I just want to also point out that hypocrisy, and that you don't realize that your rental prices might actually drop after you decide to go for it and apply for it.
It's so true, Dawn. The world of corporate affordable housing is really complex. The good news is we also have nonprofit property management systems in our city, and they'll continue to provide affordable housing for as long as they're able. The Seattle Office of Housing maintains a list of those main providers, all of which have both waitlisted project-based units and immediately available apartments for people below the 60% of AMI line. Many serve even like the 30 to 50% income brackets, such as Community Roots Housing, who's my current property manager. If you'd like to see a list of those various nonprofit orgs, we will drop a link in chat now. Next, you can go ahead and turn on a slide for me there, Tanya. Next up, I would like to introduce Sonatina Sanchez, the resident representative on the board of directors at one of Seattle's affordable housing nonprofits, Community Roots Housing. CRH manages over 40 properties across the city, most of which are in Capitol Hill. I have been working closely with Sonatina over the last couple months on some other projects, and I'm very glad to have her here tonight. She is here to explain how nonprofit rentals for lower income households operate, those ones between like the 30 and 60% of AMI lines. Thank you so much for being here, Sonatina. It's great to see you. You can go ahead and start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being considerate. I am on a train, actually, due to attending a conference for transit justice, which is a related issue when it comes to housing affordability, because we can have a house, but if we can't get to where we need to go, then it's a lot harder to find housing sometimes, to jobs and all that. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is to live and help manage actually a nonprofit public development authority, and that's what community youth housing is. So there are various different kinds of nonprofit and for-profit developments and management companies, and community youth housing is what's called a public development authority. And so it gets funding, but it doesn't get all its funding from subsidization. So it has lots of market rate housing. It accepts Section 8 vouchers. It's supposed to be one of the more accessible systems in our unit, but as we have heard, it often is not due to the draconian limitations and the squeeze that we get put on both sides. And I actually want to talk a little bit about my entering. This community housing, I applied for a apartment in 2010. So I've been with community housing since 2010. And at the time, my apartment was going to be renting for around $800. And that was actually a lot for me at that time, but it was a good area. And so I got that apartment and had a job that I was just in the income thing for. And within the year that I was first in community housing, I was going to get a raise that was going to take me over the limit and potentially disrupt my housing. And so I had to talk to my boss and I actually asked initially to have no raise until my year was up, and then we could, stack on. She didn't want to do that because she wanted to make sure that my record at work was good and it was reflective of the pay. So we figured out how much I could make in order to still qualify for my house and get a raise. And so, yeah, I very much feel that pain. One thing that is about some of these systems, at least for community housing, is when you're in the system for the year, they do self-certification, income self-certification. And once that happens, then you no longer are potentially going to lose your housing, but your rent will adjust to the amount that you're making. Only up, doesn't really go down, unfortunately. But that means that if you do start to succeed again, if your stable housing is allowing you to function and be able to improve your life, you're not going to lose your housing due to excessive income. And so that is a unique feature that I have been able to live under, and it has allowed me to live in our city and work for very, small nonprofits, volunteer, and really be a active resident in the city. And because of that, again, I've also been able to be active in the political environment in expanding the opportunity for people like us who always seem to fall through the cracks. And being on the board of community housing has shown me that there is reason to be here speaking up, but there's also a lot of reason to be hopeful, to speak up and push yourself into a position of taking on a leadership role in the community. So in my building, I have was during the pandemic, we kind of came together as much as we could at the building. And when the application for the board position opened this past year for the new resident, board position, my neighbors helped me apply, and that kind of community effort is something that happens when people are able to be stably housed. And we've had people that have lost their homes in our system due to rental hikes, and it's an overwhelming situation, as you heard from Dawn. And one of the things, I wanted to note, the already said a lot of the information about the Office of Housing website and the information they have on it. One of the things I wanted to point out actually is the renter's guide, and I'll let you go ahead and put a link straight to the PDF that's in that's on the website. And it's a little bit of an explanation about the FTE program. And the page that I wanted to highlight was page 14, which talks about income minimum policies. And certain there's an ability to have actually it's on page 15, guarantors and co-signers. Property may or may not allow guarantor. Hopefully, if you are applying with a PDA, a nonprofit public development authority, they're going to try to be helping you qualify for the apartment because they want it to be filled. And if you're the first in time and you qualify, then that should be enough. So a guarantor basically is somebody who says that they are going to make sure that if anything happens, if you don't make enough rent, right? If you don't make that the minimum that they require, then you can ask a friend or a family member to guarantee that they will help cover if something happens and you're not able to cover for 1 month. So if you're not able to make 2.5 times the rent, then you can potentially, or if you don't make 2.5 times the rent, you can potentially help somebody help you. So yeah, reading the documents and figuring out how to effectively slip through the cracks has been some of the ways that I've had to exist in the world, and so that's one of the things that I would like to encourage people here in is that you my brain going on a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to close with basically a little bit of an encouragement to talk to me and other leaders in the housing sector. Being on the board of directors doesn't mean I'm powerful, but it does give me a seat at the powerful table of here. That means that our voices, the voices that we're all presenting here today, are going to be heard a lot more effectively. And the more of us that sit on those boards, the more of us that step forward and say, I'm going to change the rules to reflect how society should be, more than that will happen. So that's why I guess I'm here. He invited me to talk a little bit about that, and I would just encourage you to ask me questions about being on a nonprofit board or living in community housing for over 10 years now. And it has been a struggle. I've applied a few times to maintain that housing. And you don't know why. It's been my lifeline. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I would be still here. So yeah. Are there any questions or comments about
There's a question in the chat for you, Sonatina, from Lana, who says that she's left messages for CRH staff about available listings, but has never heard back. It's happened on several occasions. Do you know why the office is not returning calls or emails?
Yes, often if you call the main community housing office, they will forward your information to the property itself, and the property manager is the one that's responsible for doing the leasing and contacting the people and all that stuff. And I feel like that's another flaw in the system. As you were saying, we don't have a regularly maintained collection of available units in the city of Seattle, and even each system doesn't often have an easily accessible list of units and if they're being applied for or what. And so my biggest suggestion is to talk to the property manager first. Try to get if you see a listing, call the property, not the main office. That's what they'll tell you to do as well. If you don't hear from somebody after leaving a message in the morning, go ahead and call them back in the afternoon. Don't be shy about contacting because it's not going to hurt you. Yes, call the property, not the main office. I don't know how other systems work. I know community housing is varying systems, but you must call the property because they're just going to forward it there, and you might need that third or fourth then that got on to that called the property instead of the main office.
Thank you, Sonatina. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sonatina. You are excellent. I just wanted to let you know that your train connection is a little rough tonight, but we got most of everything you said. So 2 thumbs up for Amtrak. Next up, I would like to give John Grant the floor. John has over 2 decades of experience in housing policy and community organizing. He currently serves as the lead staff at the Low Income Housing Institute on government relations and public policy. He previously worked in the housing department at Solid Ground and formerly served as the executive director of the Tenants Union of Washington State. He has directly provided tenant counseling services to over 4,000 tenants across the state. And we are very honored to have you here with us tonight, John, to talk about permanent supportive housing.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's really my honor to be asked to support these community organizing efforts and educate folks about what affordable housing options are out there and if it's a good fit for them. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. We'll see how that goes. 1 second. All right. Can you all see my slide there? Cool. So I'm going to be talking about permanent supportive housing, or PSH. This is a specific type of affordable housing that is really geared towards folks who have been experiencing chronic homelessness. Permanent supportive housing is housing that's really geared for folks that are currently homeless. They may have some sort of disabling condition. Maybe it's a substance use disorder, perhaps it's a chronic health issue. various barriers that may have prevented them from accessing housing and reaching stability for any number of reasons. So for these households, their rents are going to be fixed so that they're not paying too much. It's generally about 30% of somebody's rent. What their rent is 30% of whatever their income is. So if you're very low income, like on Social Security or on a fixed income, this housing will be affordable to you. Another unique quality to permanent supportive housing is that most referrals go through coordinated entry. So there really isn't an application process where, and I'll explain what coordinated entry is, but there is not really an application that you fill out to get into these housing units. There's so few of these properties that they're a very precious resource. And so the county and county officials, which we'll get into, really try to match people who have the highest need to these units. Again, if you're going to be applying for this housing, you generally have to be around 0 to 30% of your area median income. And you can see that chart that Dee did a great job of breaking down earlier. So on the right here is June Leonard Place. This is one of our permanent supportive housing properties. We have about 6 of them. Permanent supportive housing, the common features, not always, but generally there's 24/7 staffing on site. There are behavioral health supports. So we have a contract, for example, with a certified behavioral health provider, Therapeutic Health Services, where they provide mental health counseling, substance use disorder counseling, and all of those important things. Some providers even have medical staff on site. A very great example of that is Hobson Place, which is owned by DESC on Rainier Avenue. They actually have a partnership with Harborview, where they actually have medical staff like on site. And it's really a building that's geared for folks that have serious chronic health conditions. And then, of course, a pretty common thread for most of these properties is that there's on-site case management for the residents. Now, in terms of the need for PSH, to the surprise of no one, it's huge. By these estimates vary depending on how you break up the numbers, but one pretty well agreed upon number is that there's at least 6,500 chronically homeless people in King County, and you can bet that that's an undercount, right? Again, we're not talking about all homeless people, just chronically homeless people. The last point in time count found that there was actually 13,000 people who were homeless. Again, we know that that is a huge undercount. But for the kind of subpopulation of folks who are generally homeless, about 6,500 are chronically homeless. And that's if you're homeless for 1 year or longer, or have experienced at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the last 3 years. Homelessness continues to have a disproportionate impact on communities of color, and that needs to really be emphasized. 25% of people experiencing homelessness in King County identify as Black or African American, but only make up 7% of the general population in King County. And if you're American Indian, you also see pretty significant disproportionate impacts as well, where 9% of people are experiencing homelessness identify as American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous, but they only make up 1% of the total population in King County. And it's a really sad state of affairs that 57% of folks who are homeless altogether are unsheltered. And of those folks, and you can see that's actually an increase from 2020, which is the last time there was a point in time count. So it's gone up 10%, which is terrible. So many of these folks, about 51% identify as having a disability, 31% identify as having a mental health disorder, 37% identify as having a substance use disorder. And so this is really the population of folks that permanent supportive housing is targeting. It's the unsheltered folks who have some of these co-occurring conditions that have, in many cases, gosh, I mean, some folks have been out in the streets or in the green belts for 10 years. And so this is really a program that's supposed to get those folks inside. Okay, so what is coordinated entry? I think if you talk to anybody who is a person with lived experience or anybody who's a service provider, they won't have a lot of great things to say about coordinated entry. I am one of those people. I think even the people that run coordinated entry don't have a lot of great things to say about coordinated entry. But the long and short of it is that to access permanent supportive housing, if you are homeless and you want to get that housing with those kind of deep level of services, you have to go through this system. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, which is the federal agency that administers all federal homelessness assistance dollars, they require, if you're going to get any of those federal dollars, to have a COC, or a continuum of care, which is just a countywide government agency. And in King County, that is the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So there's like 10 acronyms there, but the long and short of it is that the Regional Homelessness Authority is in charge of coordinated entry. That is a change, a fairly recent change. It used to be that King County, the Department of Community and Human Services, which is a separate entity unto itself, used to administer this. And then they created this other entity called the Regional Homelessness Authority, which would be a whole other presentation to talk about what that is. They handed off this responsibility to this other group. And so now the Regional Homelessness Authority is in charge of coordinated entry, and they've made some changes, and I think they're actually making some changes for the better. But nonetheless, if you are going to get access to housing, you go through this system. If you want to get into that system, here's what that looks like. If you are homeless and you're on the call right now, these are the phone numbers, addresses, and locations for what are called regional access points. If you're homeless and you need any kind of service, whether it's shelter, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, you go to one of these regional access points, and you should call first if you've got a phone. If not, then if they take in-person appointments, some don't, but you can go to some in person. They will do an assessment of you. It's a pretty long process. I've not gone through it. I hear it's like 30 to 45 minutes or more. And they ask you a bunch of questions, and they try to figure out like what's a good match. And so if you're somebody who has all of those other conditions, like you have a mental health issue or chronic health issue or substance use disorder, and you've been homeless for like the last couple of years, they're going to try to prioritize you for permanent supportive housing. Of course, again, there are very few units for that. So if you want to get into coordinated entry, this is how you do that. And I kind of wanted to emphasize that for anybody on the call who is trying to access services. The Regional Homelessness Authority keeps a dashboard in all their permanent supportive housing units. It's not an exact number, but all those little brown dots at the bottom there, those are all of the permanent supportive housing properties that they're tracking in their system. And one really great thing that I think is worth noting here is that green square in the middle, the 2% return to homelessness. It's an incredibly effective program. The vast majority of people that get into permanent supportive housing, if you're lucky to do that, they stay and they have stability. They're connected to services, their rents are subsidized, all those good things. So that is great. And obviously we need more of it. So speaking of that, how do you pay for all this? Where does it come from? This is not a comprehensive list by any means, but some of the biggest funding sources for permanent supportive housing come at the local, state, and federal level, which is no surprise. This varies, but at the Low Income Housing Institute, when we develop permanent supportive housing, the average cost is around $330,000, and that can go up or down. It totally depends. $330,000 per unit. So if you want to do some math on that, you can figure out exactly how much it costs to get everyone housed, but that is just a good piece of information to know. One of the biggest funders for affordable housing is the city of Seattle through the Seattle Housing Levy. This is a property tax that generates about $41 million a year. It is up for renewal, and they're talking about expanding it from 290 million to I think I heard 580. or excuse me, no, 870, I think was what I heard, but obviously it should be like 2 billion, but it's not. So we should advocate this year for a bigger housing levy. Right now, the city of Seattle is contemplating that. Not on this list, but worth mentioning is the Jumpstart Fund, which is a pretty big omission. The Jumpstart Fund generates about close to, I think it was like $300 million a year for affordable housing. Not all of that goes towards permanent supportive housing, but a lot of it will. And it's also worth noting that thanks to the organizing of groups like B Seattle, the Tenants Union of Washington, Washington Can, Real Change, all these great community organizing groups, and Social's Alternative, I should mention, like all these groups kind of came together and fought for what was then called the Amazon tax, and that kind of turned into the Jumpstart tax. And so because communities came together and fought for affordable housing, we now have this huge affordable housing fund that is sourced from a tax on big businesses like Amazon. So that is a huge win for affordable housing advocates, and it doesn't get done without community organizing. The State Housing Trust Fund is also a big source of revenue for affordable housing. That is like from document recording fees. So every time there's like a real estate transaction, there's a fee assessed to that. So that, this year we're shooting for, I think, a $400 million housing trust fund. And a lot of that money goes towards permanent supportive housing. And then we get a little bit of money from the feds. We have the National Housing Trust Fund, and this year we got about 17 million, which is nice, but not a lot. That is really it. I wasn't sure how much time I had, and I wanted to leave some time for questions, but that is permanent supportive housing in a nutshell.
You are so awesome, John. Thank you for a great presentation. Does anyone have a quick question for John before we move along, since we're running low on time? Elaine?
Good question.
Not a question, but thank you, John. I think my mutual friend, 15 years unhoused, 15 years housed at the Julia apartment.
Oh,
and
nice.
I just texted him to ask permission to share his story. And so I just want to let you know that was one of our first wave of getting kids from PSKS house. So just wanted to give a shout out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elaine.
I have a quick question, John. You showed us that chart. You said, I think 51% of the homeless are disabled. I think you said 37% are addictive, and that middle one with mental health, how many was that?
I can go back.
Yeah, circles in it.
Yeah, and that information came from RHA's point in time count, which they're supposed to do every year, but I think they skipped a year because of the pandemic. So
Okay.
51% identify having a disability, 31% identify having a mental health disorder, and 37% with a substance use disorder.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much. I mean, it is really good to see that there are places for people to live and get the support they need to lead their lives as normally as possible. I really do wish we had a lot more capacity in these programs so that we could help everyone who needs it. Hey, John, you can go ahead and stop sharing whenever
I have
you're ready.
one more question for John. Now that
Go ahead, Roby.
John, when you guys first opened up the tiny house village up on Yesler, I talked to you and I was led to go there because a family that went to my grandson's daycare center, was up there. And that's when I really got in tuned of the, homeless families that are out there, and even the homeless college students. So what category do the homeless families fall into, and where do they stay, or what's the thing for them?
For homeless families
with kids, because there's a lot of homeless children at Leschi Elementary and all the schools, really.
That's a great question, Ruby. So it's more often than not that permanent supportive housing is for the single adults population. So for folks who are families, really what those folks need is probably a Section 8 voucher. And there's a whole other presentation on that and how hard it is to get Section 8. But there's also other not deeply, but moderately subsidized affordable housing programs. I mean, some were mentioned earlier in the presentation today, but those are probably better suited for families. Probably most families wouldn't want to move into a permanent supportive housing property per se. But I think that family homelessness is a really huge issue, right? And there needs to be more resources for that as well. And I think that is actually a nice lead into the Yes on I-135 initiative, because one of the big things that initiative is trying to do is to build affordable housing, not just for people who are homeless, but for folks who are low income. Maybe they don't have a disability, maybe they don't have a substance use disorder, they're just working class or have low wages because wages suck, and they just need affordable housing. And that's why, again, we should all support the social housing initiative.
Thank you, John.
We're going to use that as the grand segue. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce the co-chair of the House Our Neighbors Steering Committee, Ty Reed. Ty is here to talk to us about social housing and how it can help plug some of the gaps we can see in our current affordable housing systems. If you are registered to vote in Seattle, you should have either received that special election ballot already, or it should be in your mailbox very soon. Ty, thank you so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate you being here. I'll give you the mic.
Thanks, Dee. I'm happy to be here. Can I share my screen? Is that cool? Just go ahead and do it. Okay, I have permissions. Sweet. So I'll start the slideshow. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can throw them in the chat. I will check them after I'm done. Like Dee said, my name is Ty Reed. I am the co-chair for House Our Neighbors. And House Our Neighbors is a project of real change, which is a street paper that's been around as long as I have, almost 30 years, that has taken on this project starting the beginning of 2022. And we are the ones behind Initiative 135. House Our Neighbors, like I said, is a coalition of people who believe that all of our neighbors deserve safe and stable housing. A lot of us have lived experience and are advocates. Seattle and D-Power specifically were very involved in getting us off the ground and in the fight in 2021 to get rid of Charter Amendment 29. We totally killed it last year and 2 years ago, and got that awful amendment off the ballot. But since that entire fight, we were saying no to Charter Amendment 29 when we were really wanting to say yes to something else in the city. And so right after that fight, within a few weeks of winning, we were working on an initiative that you see before us today. It took us a couple of tries to get on the ballot, two signature gathering sessions, but we got it. We collected over 35,000 signatures, with over 28,000 of them being valid in order to be put on the ballot last year. So like Dee mentioned, the ballot should have dropped today. So before I get into everything, just know that you have between today and February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, in order to turn in your ballot. And what is social housing, right? Because we keep using that word when we talk about the initiative. There's like broad definitions that can be used. It is a housing model that you can see across the globe. So that definition is really going to vary. But for the sake of I-135, these are the 4 pillars of social housing that we're talking about when we reference that term. So one, very importantly, this is publicly owned housing, forever protected from the private market. There are no time limits on how long this housing will be in the ownership of the government. Unlike some partnerships that we have with nonprofits or private developers, this is permanently in the hands of the city and ideally the people. Permanently affordable, that means, as we've seen before, as people's income changes, their housing situation changes, and it puts people in positions of extreme precarity. The goal of social housing is that that doesn't exist, that no matter what you make, either 0% or 120% of the area median income, you will never pay more than 1/3 of your income towards rent. Very importantly, and I think a lot of people don't talk about this, but this is super important to me as someone who grew up in a lot of poor areas, cross-class communities. The intentions of having 0 to 120 AMI within a building isn't just to meet the needs of those people, because we know people in the range of 0 to 120 AMI do not have as much choice in living where they live as other people. It is also to create non-segregated, non-racialized spaces where people can live amongst people who are poor and rich, right? There's no reason why your amenities or your entrances or the design of your building or the construction or the quality should change just because you make 0%. And people who are just working class people who happen to make over 120% AMI, they still are actually being priced out of the city and have a hard time paying rent in the city and have a high rate of their income going towards rent. So it's really important that we are able to mix communities so that we undo the segregation that has happened for a long time, especially in Seattle and King County. And lastly, one of the things that you will never see on a nonprofit board or a private development board, you only really see these in co-ops, is renter, well, it wouldn't be renter, but owner leadership. So one of the things that is key to this initiative is that renters will make up 7 out of the 13 board positions for the board that makes decisions on behalf of the Seattle social housing developer. And so that means that renters will actually have a say in what goes into the bottom of their, what kind of businesses are at the bottom of their buildings, the kind of maintenance they have, who they're hiring, a lot of things that even in permanent supportive housing, you just don't see tenants having a lot of power. The board of the public developer, as I mentioned, most importantly, has a voting majority of social housing developer residents. So that means once these units have been bought or built or acquired in some way, residents who are in those buildings will have the ability to vote to be on the board of the social housing developer, 7 of them. In addition, there will be a rank and file union member, a leader from a community organization that has provided housing. An example we like to use is like El Centro de la Raza, which is a housing provider for marginalized communities, a green development professional, an urban planning professional, a public housing finance professional, and a nonprofit development professional. So we recognize there's need for expertise on the board, and these professionals, what might sound like an elitist term, could come from a variety of different low barrier projects, and for people who have a lot of background in those places. So it will be a bunch of tenants and also a bunch of people who have expertise in creating housing that is green and that is well developed. When I mentioned before that the housing and so the social housing that we're hoping to develop would meet the needs of people making 0 to 120% of area median income. In terms of who those people are, 0 to 30, as you've heard already, is a lot of people living on disability, single parent households living on welfare or using different subsidies, and childcare workers, medical assistants, public bus drivers. I think what a lot of people have heard, maybe not everybody in this room, that has been convincing, or at least has been a barrier to conversations, is that we shouldn't be subsidizing in any way possible housing for people that make 80 to 120%. But living in Seattle, that honestly isn't enough to live on, right? Making $70,000 really should sound like a lot, and it should sound like something that sets you up. But as we know, that's enough to live here, but for how long, really? And so some of the goals of these applying to this group of the population is that cross subsidization, right? So that people at the higher income can subsidize for the lower income people who are not going to be able to pay anything in rent or very little. It allows people to grow in place so that we're not hopping around as our income changes. I know for a fact that I've lived here 7.5 years in Seattle, and I've moved 6 times. Maybe 6 to 8 times. So last year I moved a few times, so it was kind of more than one in a year. But that's extremely common to just move as the price increases on your rental place. So the idea is that you get to stay in place no matter what your income looks like. And I already mentioned the rent no more than 30%. The thing that would the really important thing that I think that goes back to being tenant-led are the different ways that you can incorporate community into these social housing spaces, especially if we're talking about the ones that we will build, not just the ones that will be acquired. We could create spaces that have grocery stores, restaurants, daycares, shops, health clinics, all at the bottom or connected to these units. I know that in a lot of places I've lived in Seattle, as I've moved around many times, I've not been within walking distance or transit distance of a grocery store. There are no hospitals. I was just talking the other day about there are whole parts of the city where there are 0 hospitals, and we are not really developing communities that are equitably built. And so the goal of this is to empower tenants to create what they need within their buildings. The financing mechanism, which is actually the thing I'm the least secure about, which is great because we have an excellent video. I hope a lot of you have seen it, but we will watch it here today if that's okay. It's about 5 minutes. A lot of the way that we talk about social housing in this context for this initiative would require a small grant from the government to get us started. Sometimes it's talked about 5 million, it could be up to 20 million, but something just to get the ability to start acquiring and bonding on the rent. I don't know a lot about bonds, so please do not ask me a lot of financial questions. I will play the video and it answers quite a bit of things. But basically, we get to use the idea that once you've acquired a building, you can get a loan based off the fact that you will be collecting rent on that building, right? And so you're able to get a loan for that. And so part of the money that goes into that is kind of this cycle where you're bonding on rents, you're bonding on people's rents in order to acquire a building or purchase a building. Those rents pay off the loan and the construction and the maintenance. And as you pay off the loan and you're able to create a surplus, you're able to buy and acquire more. So it's kind of like a circular thing. And my favorite part is showing you the video that's next because it just dropped a couple days ago. And I think it does an excellent job of talking about how it's funded. I'm going to start playing it. Dee, can you nod your head if you can hear the volume? No volume. I think I need to share with volume. Let me stop sharing. Can I share with volume? Yep, share sound. Sorry, I'm like actually quite good at this than what I used to be. Okay. Oh, this one. Okay, what about now?
On February 14th, will create the first
I will
social.
rewind it.
Seattle's ballot initiative 135, if passed on February 14th, will create the first social housing developer in the city. One of the biggest questions people have is, how will social housing be paid for? Much like most apartments, the buildings operated by the public developer are funded via rental payments. But unlike private rentals, there's no profit motive, and unlike current affordable housing, it is not dependent on government rental subsidies because social housing welcomes middle-income individuals, allowing for cross-subsidization, which we will explain more soon. Let's take a look at a recent built multifamily housing building in Seattle and use its construction costs and annual expenses as a template for a hypothetical social housing building. This building would have 110 units with a mixture of studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom homes. For the first year, our building's broad expense breakdown is $490,000 for administration and staff, $305,000 for maintenance, $1.5 million for paying down the loan, which helped purchase or construct the building. The loan comes from 4% interest rate 30-year bonds issued by the Seattle social housing developer. For more about that, watch our video explaining PDA bonds. These expenses add up to $2.3 million a year. Now let's take a look at our hypothetical social housing building's resident makeup. This building has 13 extremely low-income units, which serve people making 0 to 30% of the area median income, also known as AMI. This includes people in Social Security and disability, fast food employees, and low-wage single-parent households. There's 19 low-income units, serving those who make 31% to 50% AMI. This includes custodians, childcare workers, construction workers, and grocery store employees. There's 28 low moderate income units, serving those who are making 51% to 80% AMI. This includes bus drivers, secretaries, mechanics, and mail carriers. And 50 moderate income units, which serves people making 81% to 120% AMI. Right now, people in this income bracket do not qualify for affordable housing by Seattle's income requirements and are left to compete for housing on the private market. In Seattle, These workers are competing for rentals with highly compensated tech workers, making them increasingly cost burdened by Seattle's high prices. Cost burden is defined as paying more than 30% of your income in housing costs. This moderate income group includes public school educators, nurses, and dental hygienists. Our social housing model uses a funding mechanism known as cross-subsidization. Cross-subsidization means higher income residents help cover the cost of the lower income residents. What you pay in rent is based on what you earned, and nobody pays more than 30% of their income on rent. This is made possible because social housing doesn't need to turn a profit. Any surplus funds stay in the hands of the Seattle social housing developer to invest in more social housing, not into wealthy shareholders' pockets. Now, here's how cross-subsidization keeps the hypothetical building financially sustainable. Residents make their payments, covering the annual expenses of the building. At the end of the year, this building's $2.3 million expenses are met, with $250,000 to spare. The leftover money at the end of each year stays in the Seattle social housing developer's hands and is saved for larger repairs down the road as the building ages. This will go on for the duration of the loan. Expenses will fluctuate a little bit and residents' payments will fluctuate as well. After 30 years, this building's construction loan will be completely paid off. Without the loan payment, the building's annual expenses will be reduced by $1.5 million a year. And that additional money is put into a revolving loan fund, which is leveraged to build and maintain more permanently affordable, resident-led social housing as a long-term public good. This process allows higher income residents to support their lower income neighbors just by paying their rent. I-135 would bring us closer to housing all of our neighbors and creating a healthier and more diverse Seattle where everyone can afford to live and thrive. Help us make this a reality. Join the campaign and vote yes on Initiative 135 by February 14th.
Shout out to Nikita Oliver. Okay, they did a great job narrating it. It got me really excited. So some of the things I want to point out that I think we should emphasize, especially in this conversation about affordable, low income, and permanently affordable housing, is that, like, I need to stop moving. Swivel chairs aren't great. One, the housing, as we talked about, is meant to propel the city to take on its responsibility to house people. So a lot of people will say that, like, nonprofits are already doing this, but, like, nonprofits don't have the capacity to build the housing for a city. I think that's just objectively true, right? We all know that a small group of, or even a large group of nonprofits does not have the ability to house the hundreds of thousands of people who have moved to Seattle, especially as we've had a boom. So this is not a low-income housing program. This is in order for the city to take on its responsibility to build housing at all levels. Second, as Dee, or I'm sorry if I misquote someone, I want to say it was Dee who mentioned in one of their slides, a large percentage of what we are now funding with our dollars into like the human service department and into nonprofits who are trying to develop as affordable housing as they can. A lot of that is going to higher income folks. We are actually not developing as much housing as needed for 0 to 30 because of the cost of construction and maintaining and keeping these buildings is so high because they do not pay for themselves. They require deep subsidies. It is so high that we are now building for people in that 51 to 80 range anyways, right? So this is in order to alleviate the burden on a lot of low-income housing that hasn't been able to be developed and stay as low-income housing. It just slowly gets higher and higher income. And so it's called affordable, but I think that we all recognize even if a market rate apartment for 1 bedroom is $2,000 and technically a $1,500 apartment should be affordable, it is actually inaffordable for most low-income people. So in order to actually meet the needs of everybody in our community, we need to be building housing at scale, at real scale, thousands and tens of thousands of units for people across the income spectrum from 0 to 120. So I will emphasize that this is not specifically low-income housing. But I am open to questions, and I see a lot in the chat. Dee, do you want to moderate for me and start throwing?
Let's see. We didn't have a lot. We had a lot of chat, but not a lot of questions in the chat. Did anybody have a question about social housing or I-135? You are apparently really good at explaining. This is the first time I've not seen questions. about I-135 in a minute. Thank you, Ty. You are
It's the
awesome.
video. The video does it. There's a lot of explanation in that.
Yeah, in fact, that's what the chat was saying as you were letting it play. They were just like, yeah, no, that video is awesome. So I will, if you don't mind, if there's no questions for you, we are officially mostly here at a time, which means that we aren't really going to have the time to do the ending discussion that we normally do. But Kate has an action item for us.
Yes, I do. But also, can we go back one more slide, Tanya, to the reflections? I think we've covered all of this, but I do think that this is something that folks can ponder on as we exit this shop. What gaps can you see in our current housing systems? What are the problems inherent with these programs? We've definitely touched on a lot of those things. And then what could we advocate for to make the process easier and more equitable? So let's consider that when we go forward in our advocacy. Okay, next slide, please. So at every workshop, we like to include an action that renters can take right now. If you have your ballot, you could vote right now. I'm just putting that out there, but that's not the action for the workshop. In Washington state, there is currently no limit on how much a landlord can increase your rent, and the cost of housing has far exceeded the rate of inflation. So yesterday, there were hearings for 2 House bills that would limit rent increases between 3 to 7% annually. It would be Representative Macri's HB 1388 and Representative Rammel's HB 1389. So there's a Senate companion getting a hearing at 10:30 a.m. this Friday. So our action for this workshop is to sign in pro to support Senator Trudeau's SB Senate Bill 5435. The submission form is open until 9:30 a.m. on Friday, but it only takes a few seconds to fill it out and indicate your support for this vital bill. So if you all would just take a moment to do it now, vote in pro to limit rent increases to between 3 and 7% annually. I know that would really do a lot to prevent displacement, even though, you know, there's no guarantee that our wages will keep up even with that, but it's certainly a start and it's important. So with that, we can leave that actually on the screen for a little bit. But I think we are going to wrap things up. Dee, you want to send us out?
Yeah, sure. Hey, this has been a great workshop. Affordable housing is a really complex process, and it's got so many different programs available for so many different income levels. I hope you're walking away with this with a lot more information than you had before and a little more confidence in maybe seeking out something that better suits your needs. Thanks for coming tonight, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the hard work you guys do. Thank you, Kate.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for
Night.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.